Chapter 28. November 1944, Chapel Loft, Colditz Castle. Josephine stood alone in the cooling silence of the chapel, the stone floor beneath her feet a map cooling her body. She was beyond tears, and instead, went into the practical, dressing detachedly, and investigated the discarded Red Cross supplies that Sterling had commandeered as part of his own private fiefdom and pulled on a pair of grey woolen long johns. Not that there was anyone around. How she felt that moment, Josephine didn't care who saw her. When she finally emerged into the light of the corridor in search of Reed and Howe, she was aware that the dim electrical lights were highlighting his roughness. This was confirmed when she met Reed, who stopped and stared at Josephine for a moment, astonished at her appearance. The physical signs of Sterling's taking of her were impossible to hide, despite her best efforts. He stared at the bite marks on her neck for a moment, before glancing to the loft. "You didn't get away?" he asked. "Major Sterling did," Josephine conceded, stiffly, like she felt. "And the parcels are still up there?" Josephine nodded. "Then we need your blades, the ones which originally were bents," he told her. "Compasses, any maps." She followed closely behind him and back up the stairs, then crossing to the boxes and pulling out all manner of items until she found what he wanted: buttons, Derwent pencils, even blades in the spines of combs. "Will these help?" "Immensely," Reed told her. "If you could help me take them, then be on your way." 88,888,888. A siren wailed in the courtyard and a clatter of metal. Dick Howe and Charlie Collins stood by the internal door, now unguarded, their eyes widening in astonishment as they saw Pat and Josephine clamber down the steps and along the corridor. They had witnessed Sterling vanish into the well just minutes before, and now, seeing Josephine's appearance, Collins did not hold back. "After everything you did ... after Natzweiler and the broadcast ... he treats you like a common spoil of war?" Josephine glanced in the direction of the courtyard, and beyond the well, feeling the shame of the love that she felt. She wanted him, felt free in his presence, felt herself. Yet, he had cut and run to the woman, Josephine concluded, he must love. "He treats the whole world like a spoils of war," Josephine replied, her voice steady. "For Major Sterling's sake he'd better hope the SS catch him alive, because when see him next, he's a dead man." She glanced back up towards the chapel loft. "Captain Reed is planning a mass breakout," Josephine continued, in a softer tone. "Can you get the radio working?" "I understand if you choose to go, though, Charlie." And so, as the hyped-up preparations were being made behind them, instructions shot around the dorm while men fetched, carried and planned, Charles Collins took Josephine by the hand and hurried her aloft again. Within minutes, Josephine was leaning into the radio set, her friend hovering beside her. "Milo. This is Swallow. Midnight. Execute. 88,888,888. Not long after midnight, the triple agent John Francis O'Reilly fulfilled his part. Across Germany, his voice infiltrated every radio and contact point with the distraction. There would be no going back. "This is an emergency broadcast to all Wehrmacht and SS personnel. Unequivocal German surrender has been signed at Reims. All units are ordered to lay down arms immediately and report to their local district HQs. The war is over." In the corridors of Colditz, the effect was cumulative. Hauptmann screamed at his men to hold their posts, but the guards were already dropping their rifles. They had heard the voice of Milo, and believed him to be a high-ranking interrogator, the man who knew their names. And the war had stretched their souls beyond their elastic point, so of course they did what any distressed person would do when they wanted the nightmare to end. "Collins, throw the switch," Josephine commanded, as she stood by the radio. The emergency lights of the castle flickered and died, plunging the fortress into a strategic, suffocating gloom. 88,888,888. "We did it," Lieutenant Collins whispered as the heavy front gates of the impregnable fortress creaked open, abandoned by guards who were already shedding their tunics to blend into the night. "Remember, it's not real," Josephine said, her voice a sharp tether to reality. They had descended the steps and both now stood at the threshold of the German section of Colditz that led into the courtyard, now abandoned by guards. And the sight there was to see was one to truly behold. The prisoners didn't run, they marched. Hundreds of men, led by Reed and Howe, walked through the front gates. They used the river rather than the town's roads, moving through the very conduits the German resistance used, a mass exodus of escapees passing through the veins of the castle. Douglas Bader, watching the orderly chaos and considered who Milo could be who had conjured such a masterful bit of theatre. "John Francis O'Reilly," Josephine replied as she passed him being helped by his Batman. "Remember him, Captain?" The Irishman? He remembered that man, all right, the interrogator. Josephine stopped in her traverse over the cobbles, and smiled at the flying ace. "Yes," she nodded. "He's been playing three sides of a war while you were playing Monopoly. Though the Monopoly you provided has been most useful here," Bader put in. Well. The Irishman. "I could have lost £1,000 bet on him, for I would never have thought it." 88,888,888. At the riverbank, Dick Reed and Bill Howe paused, looking back at the dark silhouette of the castle. Reed looked one last time at Josephine, a silent, helpless apology in his eyes. "Good luck to you, Josephine," Reed said quietly. "If you find him... do what you must. We'll tell Bill the truth. And then run home." Josephine watched them go, but she didn't head for the Allied lines. What home had she got? Pat Reed wasn't to know. She stood by the rushing water of the Mulder, her body aching from the violent intimacy of Sterling's departure. She felt the physical shame of it, the way she had given herself to him, the way her body had betrayed her heart, only for him to discard her for Eve Mansour. She looked at the sewing kit in her hand, the maps she had meticulously hidden inside the parcels. They had done their job. But she was homeless. Stateless too, probably, for she was not British, and to return to Ireland would mean death, her hanging for her part in the Newry train bombing. But neither would she go back to Bill Sterling as a victim. America, then. But first a broken bar. "Eve," she whispered to the freezing wind. "If he finds you first, he'll let you live. I won't." She turned away from the bridge and vanished into the trees, heading south toward the Alps. The war was ending for Europe, but for Josephine Maine, the hunt just beginning for the woman Sterling loved more than his own soul. 88,888,888. The news of the surrender and the mass breakout at Colditz hit the SAS Forward Command like a physical jolt. In the chaos of the German retreat, the story of a woman in Wehrmacht uniform who had walked into the castle and emptied it of its prisoners began to circulate among the liberated prisoners. Bill Sterling and Paddy Mayne heard the reports in the mess at Ear House, whispers of a swallow who had outplayed the Reich's own games. But while the officers celebrated, Josephine was already moving east, back toward the shadows of the Vosges, drawn by the pull of the men she had left behind. 88,888,888. Josephine found the remnants of the Vosges SAS in a forest clearing that smelled of pine and cordite. Barkworth and Yuri Galitzine were there, their faces gaunt, their uniforms caked in the mud of a dozen skirmishes. They had spent the weeks since the drop hunting seacoast patrols with a feral intensity. As Hedisselhorst, and the Waldfist shock action hastened by the jeep drops had been intense around Moosey. The truth they had uncovered was a poison. They had found the records of Natzweiler and Gagino. They knew now that their SAS colleagues, men they had laughed with at Kiev, hadn't just been killed in battle. They had been executed in the night and fog, their bodies fed to ovens or marked for erasure. Barkworth stood over a captured SD ledger, his knuckles white. "I swear on the blood of the 31, he rasped, "we will hunt every man who signed these orders. No cave in the Alps will be deep enough to hide them." Yuri merely sharpened his blade, his eyes reflecting a cold, Slavic resolve. They were no longer soldiers, they were avengers. He nodded silently to Josephine, who nodded back. This was justice, there could be no other. Out of the tree line stepped Henry Druce. In the middle of the collapsing order of war he looked absurdly, defiantly civilized, wearing a black top hat he'd scavenged from a bombed-out estate and a pair of sturdy corduroy trousers. He saw Josephine, her appearance, her utter exhaustion and will to see the justice through to the end, and didn't ask questions. Not about how she had got there, or found them, nor about David Sterling. Her partner simply crossed over to her and wrapped a heavy coat around her shoulders. "Go home, Josephine," he said softly. "The war is ending. There is nothing left for you in these woods but ghosts. We will pick this up. Barkworth has sworn to find every last man. He even used a board to try to speak to the dead." "I don't have a home, Henry," she admitted, her voice fragile, a part of her smiling at Eric's conveying of that story. "I ran away from Mount Pleasant, from the Mains, to be a Republican. I married Michael O'Neill. We lived house to house, always running, until the prison doors shut. There's nowhere to go back to." Druce reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key. He pressed it into her palm, his hand steady and warm. "You still have the key to my flat in London? It's yours. While I am here, while we ensure that those who did this to our comrades are brought to justice, you stay there. Hide from the world for a while." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture of pure, platonic sanctuary. "Look after my flat, Josephine. Keep the fire lit. I'll come back to you." He slipped his hand into hers. "Make your home run." 888,888,888. January 1945. Josephine accepted the key, the metal cold against her skin, which she touched now and then as she traversed France with the help of her Mackie contacts, in order for her to get to the Channel, and across it. She knew what she had to do. She would go to London, but not to the Sterlings. She would hide in the heart of the city, evading the reach of Dudley Clark, the cold calculations of Hugh Dalton, and the prying, serpentine eyes of Stuart Menzies at MI6. She would sit in the quiet of Druce's flat and write her report, the true report. not the one for the official files, but a record of every name, every betrayal, and every moment of David Sterling's cowardice. But the report was only the beginning. Once the names of the fallen were recorded, once she knew the 31 had been avenged by Barkworth and Yuri, she would turn her attention to the final loose end. She would find Eve Mansour. She would track her to whatever alpine villa or sun-drenched hideout Sterling had chased her to. She wouldn't go there for love or for the SAS. She would go there to recite the names of the men Eve had killed, names that had been paid for in blood, and then, with the same cold detachment she had used to walk out of Colditz, she would kill her. The war was over for the world, but for the Swallow, the most dangerous mission was just beginning. And, as a few weeks went by, that turned to months, she knew something was wrong. An ache in the bottom of her stomach, where her scar was, reminded her of something that had happened before. A doctor would know.